welcome to this edition of Spotlight with Sandhya. On today's show, we're off to Singapore to meet a poet whose work moves me immensely. Nandini Sen Mehra has won an international poetry contest, and more importantly, her debut book of poetry, Words Written, has just been published. In a literary coup of sorts, the foreword has been written by none other than the great Gulzar. So let's meet Nandini to find out how this came about. Nandini, thank you for being on Spotlight with Sandhya. The last that I knew of you, you were writing press releases and as a communications professional. And the next that I see, you're writing poetry. How did that come about?
I think all the time that I was writing for work, the poetry was sort of hidden away, tucked away, and maybe it just needed a little space for it to really come out. So, I worked in communications. I worked in Bangalore for many years, and then I moved to the US, I moved to Australia, finally to Singapore for the last 10 years. And after I moved to Singapore specifically, I stopped working in communications that frequently. I was doing freelance work, but not as a regular sort of writer. And I think that's when I was able to really explore the whole interest in poetry. And it sort of came back. It was always there. I studied English literature. I enjoyed reading poetry, but I started writing it much more after I moved to Singapore. And I think one of the catalysts for that, if I may, was, I started going on these really long walks through wooded paths, and Singapore, contrary to popular belief, it is quite green. It's got a lot of hidden sort of treasures that you can roam through. And I can't pinpoint what exactly sort of made it happen, but I did feel a certain commune with nature made it easier for the stories to come that then I was able to speak of in my poetry.
Okay. I recall that you taken part in a kind of a social media poetry challenge, and you used to post a poem almost every day. So
Yes.
was that the beginning of the book that we see now?
No, actually, I was always writing in a little bit of a bubble. I was writing for myself. I would post it maybe on Facebook, and all my friends would read it, or, people like you who I've known for a while. But I never really was part of any sort of organized writing group, or never took part in any competitions. But it just, things have a funny way of coming together. And I think I felt quite confident at that time when this poetry thing came along, which was a poem a day for a month. Just for a lark, I took part, and sort of it coincided with the finalization of the book as well. So both things sort of happened in parallel, but the book actually had started. To be honest, it's quite a funny story. On my 40th birthday, my mum had given me a manuscript, sort of egging me on, saying, look, I've done the work for you now. I've put all your poems in one place, so get going. And then in jumps and starts, the book was slowly falling in place. And it all sort of came together around this time.
Okay, I think just before that, you also won a poetry contest, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
It was for that actually, which was the 30 poems over a period of a month. And it's by a group, a literary group called the Significant League. And Dr. Ampat Koshi is the founder of that group. And after the whole month, they hand out prizes for, the best writer or the best upcoming poet. So I won the best upcoming poet, the Rural International prize for the best upcoming poet for this year. So that's how it came about.
Congratulations. I think,
much.
All your hard work paid off. I'm sure, it's something to just have a notion in your head, but to actually commit to writing a poem every single day is quite a challenge.
Yeah. It was, and some of them were quite technical. So I had to revisit my university, learnings about the form and technique, because generally I write quite free flow, but this was, you had to write a sonnet, or you had to write, something very specific on a theme. So it was challenging and interesting, yes.
Wonderful. You got to meet Gulzar himself, and that must have been quite something to get him to write the foreword and really such high praise from him. That's a commendable achievement. I remember that several years ago, he used to always want to come and stay at the West End Hotel in Bangalore, the Taj West End, as it's now known as, when he used to sit down and lock himself up for several weeks while he was writing his script. And I had the privilege of interviewing him, and he was such a gentle soul and so laid, what shall I say? Laid back is the wrong word to use. I said so low key. Low key is the word that I was
Yes,
looking for.
yes.
And I had, I interviewed him to write an article about him. And in this time, when your book was coming out, you met him to get the forward, and that must have been such a high for you, right? I mean, one is the actual fact that the book is coming out. The second thing is to get somebody who's so highly respected and admired and loved as Gulzar you, but also give a forward. How did that happen, Nandini?
My association with Gulzar Saab goes back a couple of years, and his son-in-law and his daughter Begna, they are friends of our family. Govind, his son-in-law, and my husband work quite closely together. And whenever I had met him in the past, I was quite reluctant to share my poems with him because there's just no way that I thought he would have any interest in reading my jottings. Eventually, after sort of my mom put together that manuscript, and Govind offered, and he said, "Why don't I show this to Babuji? Why don't I show him and ask him for advice?" So that's how it started. So I sent him, a typed up version of the manuscript, and he showed it to Babuji, and he just asked him, like, what do you think of these poems? And as he says in the foreword, that in the beginning, of course, he probably gets so many manuscripts to look at, and so many people send him things to read. He started reading them quite casually, and then I honestly don't know what he liked or what he found, but he says that he found something quite refreshing or something quite new in. And it sounds quite silly to even talk about it like this, but that's sort of his contribution to that. So he got interested in my poems in his quiet way, in his very unassuming way. Started putting a lot of pressure on me to get it done, and he gave me quite a lot of advice. And then when I was still sort of like, okay, we'll see, we'll get it done, he was like, "I'm going to write the foreword and you are going to do it." So that's
Wow. I cannot think of a higher pressure than that for Gulzar to
so then
actually say
it's
he's
gone.
finished writing it.
So he finished writing the foreword, and then he sent it to me, and then I sort of had to sort of get things moving, and then it came about in that.
I'm sure all of us are also very happy that this thing came about thanks to your mom and Gulzar and his son-in-law. It's a beautiful coming together of all the creative family, I would say.
Yes.
Nandini, I've been dipping into your poems, and well, many of them are happy and they soar up and take me into a beautiful world of nature and sunshine and love. There are some which are really sad, and it seems to be at dissonance with the life that I see you leading. Would you care to comment upon what drives this sadness, this pathos that one reads in your poems?
Um, I think over the years, now I'm in my 40s, right? So over the years, I feel my sensitivity to what is around me has sort of increased, been more honed. Perhaps I've had more space in my life to really reflect on these things. So what might be sad poems are sometimes not just drawn from my own personal experiences, but they sort of extend to things I see around me. There is so much pathos in life, right? And I think you become a bit more tuned to it perhaps once you're a mother or once you're older, and and it's almost like a journey of a poet where I opened myself up more emotionally and spiritually in a way. So I would absorb things more deeply. For instance, if I watched, it could just be I'm standing in a queue for something, and I watch an older person perhaps struggling in front of me. And I can build a whole life or a whole story around just that one moment. And while it may be a life very disconnected from mine, in that moment when I'm writing, perhaps I'm writing as her, or I'm writing in that character. So it's really, I think, the sadness, the pathos, even the poems of joy and happiness, sometimes they're not intrinsically personal, but they're more about being sensitive to my environment or to some passing thought or passing image that I see that triggers a whole universe of thoughts. So yeah.
I must say, I enjoy reading each and every poem of yours. You really tap into some deeply, sensitive core in the reader, and you have a beautiful way of putting words together. It's really a great gift, and I'm glad you're sharing it with us. You being a survivor of two traumatic incidents, one was a sexual assault and one is gun violence. How have they impacted you? And do you think poetry has been a way, as a kind of an outlet where it has helped you work through the remembered pain and, just get it out there and deal with it?
Let me talk about the gun violence first. Yeah, perhaps that is even easier, shockingly, than talking about, sexual
Yes.
assault. So the gun violence was an accidental incident. Very quickly, I was at a friend's house. And, we were all children and we were playing, and the oldest son came out with a small game rifle and he said, "Hands up." And I said, "I'm not going to do hands up to you." And I started to walk and he fired, and he didn't know the gun was loaded. So it just comes down to, if you're a gun owner, you keep your guns away from your children. And so many of accidental deaths happen because of careless handling and storage of guns. Fortunately, it wasn't such a big risk to life. I walked home actually drenched in blood, and my mom was gardening there and she nearly collapsed, I think, just looking at me. And I went and saying, "Ma, I got shot." And luckily, my grandfather, who's a doctor, was visiting at that time, and he did the primary aid and all of that. So I was fine. I was quite young. I think I was 10. It was a good story to be able to tell in school, I think, to, have survived, a gun assault. But now when I think back, I think, there's so many things that can happen, with guns and with weapons. And I think the sensitivity to storage, handling, and even being able to own a gun the awareness needs to be far better than it is, for sure. Talking about the sexual assault, and Sandhya, we've grown up in India, and I can only speak of growing up as a child and a young woman in India. And unfortunately, I think these stories are far more prevalent than perhaps you as a woman even know. And certainly men, should also know that it's far more common than just one random person saying, "Oh, I was a victim of sexual assault." Whether it's casual groping, eve teasing, being on public transport like we would use in Calcutta, and being advised to sit with a compass, open compass, on your shoulder, so no one who's standing right next to you can just lean into you. And so all of these things, I think, we've grown up with. And without delving too much into detail, I would say that I think I have processed sexual assault over the years in a way where today I can almost speak of it in quite a matter of fact way, like I can speak of the gun wound that I have. It's a part of my journey. It's a part of many women's journey, many men's journey as well. It's something that we don't talk about, that's not normalized in being able to speak about, but I think we should, because it's all about awareness, right? And the more that we are aware as parents, as people in society, the more vigilant I think we will be to it. Because a lot of this assault happens in homes, happens among close relatives, and because it's not talked about, perhaps it's something that's brushed under the carpet more often than not, even today.
Absolutely. Not talking about it actually empowers the, perpetrator,
Perpetrator.
and the victim shaming or blaming is just not right. And this is something that all of us should try to avoid, and to make sure that A, the victim can come out and seek help, and B, that such kind of crimes don't happen at all. and I'm glad that you're speaking out about it. From this point, let's move on to your next journey. I heard that now you're actually trying to put together a book. So, would this be a book of short stories? Would it be a novel? Because I think you have the style that would lend
To write
itself
a
very
novel.
well to writing a novel. So, I think you should aim for that. What's your plan?
I have always loved short stories, whether they were Moms or O. Henry of Anton Chekhov. I really enjoy the form. And sometimes, my poems are sort of for a short story that's in my head, but because maybe in that moment I don't have the time to devote to writing the whole short story out, it sort of comes out more as a poem. So I think perhaps the next interesting sort of journey for me will be to write a collection of short stories.
Great. You being a poet, and it's a par for the course on this show that any poet who comes on the show should actually read out one of their poems. Nandini, can we hear you reading one of your poems from your
Sure,
book? And also tell us
absolutely.
where anybody can buy the book. I know right now physical stores may not be open everywhere, but
Yeah,
please tell us where they can buy it, and but let's begin by giving a sample of what's in the book for the people
sure.
who watch the show.
Absolutely. I'm going to read from the book, which is called Worlds Within. So I'm going to read one. I've been following the news of how the board exam results have just come out in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the Facebook comments seem to be everybody's in their 90s, everybody's getting 90 and above. And I remember that time and the pressure on children today. And I wrote this poem called Of Parents and Fear, Mostly Unrealized. And it speaks to a lot of the concern and anxiety around expectations. Yeah. If you could stop fear, stop being afraid for me of a future that won't obey, though I try, but it won't spring out of bed to the call of your alarm, won't abide by your it's time you of a life, my life that won't weave itself conveniently into your plans for next summer or of my success. If you could put aside this distrust of this world, of things that make me so untethered, of unrealized dreams and realized nightmares, of what she would say, your third cousin, who wears all of her jewelry all of the time and tells it like it is and never minces words, though she frequently bludgeons them, or him, a fine, comb overd specimen, your bank manager, who attends to you personally, his body always bent at a solicitous 45 degrees when he asks about me in that greasy, familiar way. The marriage messiahs who want to know when, the smug careerists who want to know why. If you could take their voices that play with your fears, Ma, and toss them into the air behind us, to scatter and fall as they may, if you could be brave for 1 minute of the day and listen to my words without flinching, waiting, without needing your words to cover the shame of mine, without the what ifs and but thens that claw their way up your throat. If you could, for 1 minute of one day, see me as I am, would you know how to love me then?
That is so beautiful, and yes, people
Mm.
should be loved whether they achieve 95% or 99 percentile or not.
The other one, perhaps it's a little bit more solemn, but this is a poem that's quite close to my heart. It's called Asifa. We remember the incident with Asifa, the child who was raped and then murdered.
Yeah,
And, it's not specific to Asifa, it's specific to this kind of violence that's across the
right.
world. You froze the ink in my pen, Asifa. You made my blood run cold. Your face, your eyes, a question, Asifa. These wounds, both new and old. I stare at his face, a regular man. He too was once a child. What sickness came upon his brain? This madness, rage run wild. Does evil find the hollow hearts of men, and to fell it, he must die? What hate, what lust, what drove him there? Does it live in you and I? This shame, this anger, this sharing of grief? Will we keep this moment alive? Will her death, her pain, her life, her name remind us always of why? Of why there is scant meaning in gods or texts or lands, in leaders and their platitudes, in our outstretched praying hands. If we, in all our wisdom in this land where religion thrives, cannot protect our weakest, their innocence and their lives, what use then are our idols? What use are holy books? Why visit temples, churches, go to mosques, our praying nooks? Instead, let's look at our mirrored eyes for the humanity that we seek, for the protectors of the voiceless, for the voices of the weak. Let's change our songs of them and us and create instead a life where our thoughts, our words and actions build a world removed from strife, where an 8-year-old Asifa can roam her meadows, free, her horses grazing beside her in the shade of a summer tree. And the world is a gentler, kinder place because we've chosen to make it so. And a mother doesn't cling to a little dress for her little girl who is no more.
Oh, Nandini, that is so beautiful and soulful, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, I downloaded your book on my Kindle.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I did. And
So the ebook is out now, and the print book perhaps later in the year. It's called Worlds Within. It's available on Amazon.in in India and Amazon.com internationally. And my website, nandinisenmehra.com, is another space where I have some readings. I have some of my visual poetry, which is photographs that I have taken, and you can link to buying the book from there as well.
On that note, I would like to thank Nandini Sen Mehra for joining us today, taking time off from her busy life in Singapore to discuss what inspired her to write these beautiful verses that just add some kind of a beauty to the day that you read one of them. Now, to our viewers, do subscribe to the Raintree Media channel on YouTube, like and share our videos. You can also listen to these episodes as podcasts on Spotify. Check it out. I'll be back soon. Until then, stay safe.